Why? Because the aqidah of 4 imams, does it differ? Did the belief in the fundamentals of the religion and tawheed, he fell into error with regard to the definition of iman and the understanding of iman, meaning the definition of iman itself. But in general, when we look at the other 3 imams, including Abu Hanifa outside of this mistake of his, that they were united in their aqidah. You cannot tell the difference. Why? Because their aqidah was one. So where did the madhabs come from then? So when we talk about the madhab of Abu Hanifa, the madhab of Malik, the madhab of Shafi'i, the madhab of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, we are not talking about these affairs. Because in these affairs they do not differ. Their usul in their aqidah was one. And they were agreed upon it. But they differed in affairs of fiqh. With the Sahaba they differed. So you find that some of the Sahaba, they differed in their modality of prayer. Into certain minute aspects of the prayer, they differed. So the A'immah that followed them, the Imams that followed them, they differed also based upon what they held to be authentic from the hadith of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or how they understood what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were conveying after the Sahaba spread into the different lands. A Sahabi in Azerbaijan, a Sahabi in Syria, in Sham, a Sahabi in Yemen, a Sahabi in Egypt, a Sahabi in Baghdad, a Sahabi in Khurasan. The Sahaba, they spread. So when the Sahaba, they spread, they took the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with them. So a Sahabi may have understood something from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in an aspect of fiqh, or inheritance, or an aspect of fasting, or an aspect of the prayer, or an aspect of business contracts. That a Sahabi in another place may have differed with him in that issue, because that Sahabi may not have heard the hadith that this Sahabi heard. That's possible. It can happen today with the ulama. So it happened with the Sahaba. So they passed that knowledge on to their students. And the Sahaba were mujtahidun, that they were scholars of ijtihad. So they acted upon the ayat that they knew, the hadith that they knew, and they gave rulings based upon it. So the people that they were teaching and the fatwa that they were given were based upon the knowledge that they had. But is there room, for example, in ikhtilaf in the usul of the aqidah? No. So all of the Sahaba held that Allah will be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah, the ru'ya, they believed in it. They never differed in that, the Sahaba. So you don't find one Sahabi saying to another Sahabi, actually Allah will not be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah. None of the Sahaba, one Sahabi would not say to another Sahabi, there's no questioning in the grave by Munkar and Nakir. No. Why? Because their aqidah, they were united upon. Why? Because the religion that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent with, that it established that foundation in their aqidah and tawheed. Established without difference. So the Sahaba did not differ. But in aspects of fiqh they may have differed, because they make Islam. Two Sahaba went on a journey. Both of them woke up after the night in a state of janaba. What are they going to do? They know about tayammum. If the water is not available, what do you do when you wake up in a state of janaba and no water is available? One of them, he made tayammum. Because that's his ijtihad. He said, well, if we don't have wudu, we make tayammum. We're in a state of janaba, sexual impurity, I'm going to make tayammum. The other one, he said, no, there must be, maybe there's something more that needs to be done. What did he roll around in the soil? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he affirmed both of them. But for one is 2 rewards, and for the other there is 1 reward. Why? Because they're mujtahid. They're scholars. So the one who was incorrect out of those 2 opinions, which is the one who rolled in the soil, because from his ijtihad is that tayammum, which is a simple thing of striking the ground, wiping your face, wiping your hands, then that is for wudu. But when you do for janazah, must be, from his ijtihad, it should have been extra. So he rolled in the soil, or in the sand. When they went back to the Prophet ﷺ, he informed them with regard to their affair, and he affirmed the correctness. For one there is 1, and for the other there is 2 rewards. For the one who is incorrect there is 1 reward. For the one who is correct there is 2 rewards. How do you give a reward to the one who is incorrect? Because his reward is for his ijtihad, for his striving to seek the truth. 1 reward. For the other one there is 2 rewards. 1 reward for his ijtihad, 1 reward for the correct conclusion. That's for the scholars, and for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and for the scholars till this time. Now, in the issue of the aqidah, and the usul, and the tawheed, is there such a thing between the Sahaba? Never. They were agreed. You don't go to the grave of the dead and seek aid from the dead. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum never differed, as Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah and others, and Imam Al-Dhahabi, they have mentioned that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum never differed with regard to the ulu of Allah. That Allah is the most high. That the arsh, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above his arsh, distinct and separate from his creation, and he is, from his names, Al-Ali. So when we talk about the madhabs, what we're talking about in the early days, when the madhabs were present in the time when they appeared, or the imams they appeared rather, like Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi and Ahmed ibn Hanbal, rahimahumullah ta'ala jami'an, that when they appeared, they're differing when we say the madhab of Ahmed in that time. We're not talking about him differing in Aqidah with Shafi'i, or with Malik, or with Abu Hanifa. We're not talking about differing in Aqidah. Their differing was like the differing of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, based upon the evidence that they had from the Kitab and the Sunnah. In the affairs of the Furu' and the Umur Ijtihadiyya, those affairs that had some room for maneuver in affairs of fiqh and the branches of the religion, and they differed. But in the usul of the Aqidah, they did not differ. A person may come along and say, well, actually they did. Because the Sahaba, they differed what was created first. And the early Salaf, they differed as to what was created first. Was it the pen or the arsh? They say, look, that's a difference in usul. Is that a difference in usul? No. The difference in usul would be, we don't believe that Allah created the arsh. Or the arsh is metaphoric, it is not a real entity. Or the qalam is something symbolic of Allah's will. Then that is a problem. But as for the Salaf differing as to what came first and what came second, it's not differing in the usul. Why? Because all of the Salaf, this ummah, the Sahaba and those who came after them, Tabi'een, Atba'u Tabi'een, the A'immatul Huda, they all agreed that the arsh is a creation and the pen is a creation. They all agreed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above the arsh. And the arsh is a real created entity by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and meaning is the throne. And Allah is above it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the qalam. And they all agreed that Allah created that which is called the qalam, the pen. And then Allah said to the pen, uktub, write. And the pen said, what shall I write? And Allah said, write all of the pre-decree till Yawm al-Qiyamah. So the pen, it wrote it. Sahaba differ? No. Salaf differ? No. Did the four Imams differ? No. So what did they differ upon? They differed upon the wording of the hadith as to which of the two was created first. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth, Allah created the pen. And then Allah said to the pen, write. And the pen said, what shall I write? And Allah said, write everything that occurred from now till Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَكَانَ أَرْشُهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. And then Allah's Messenger said, and his throne was above the water. So now, how do we understand this hadith? Did the throne come after the creation of the pen, after that 50,000 years, before the creation of the heavens and the earth? So Allah created the pen and then the throne. Or is Allah saying that 50,000, or the Prophet ﷺ saying that 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth, that Allah created the pen, but the throne was already there because Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, وَكَانَ عَرْشُهُ, and his throne was over the water. So the Sahaba did not differ with regard to the pen. They did not differ with regard to the water. They did not differ with regard to the arsh. The only thing they differed was upon the awwaliyah. Was the water first? Was the pen first? Or was the arsh first? This is not an issue of the usul of the Aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah. Because the usul of the Aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah is that all of these were real, and they were all created, and they were all present. Which one came first? Then the reality is that Allah knows best. But the scholars, they spoke about what came first, because they will speak. They say, no, the hadith states that the pen came first. This is the position of Shaykh Al-Albani and those that he took from the Salaf. A group of them said, no, the arsh came first. Position of Ibn Taymiyyah and the scholars that came before him. But both of them agreed the arsh was a creation and Allah is above it. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. The most merciful has ascended over his arsh. So they affirm the arsh. The only thing that they differ upon is which one came first. That's not in the usul. That's the issue of the furu' from the usul. It's an issue of a branch from a fundamental. But the fundamental is agreed upon. Will Allah be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah? Is that lecture already done, right? Allah will be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah. We all agree.
No.
Right? Because it's Kitab, Sunnah, Ijma'. Allah will be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah. The question is, did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam see Allah or not see Allah whilst he was alive? And did he see him with his eyes or did he see him with his heart? That's the difference of opinion amongst the scholars. But the ru'ya itself, the seeing of Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah, is not differed upon by anyone from the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. What did they differ upon? A group of them said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his. A group of them said he never saw him, and they kept it general. A group of them said that he never saw him with his eyes, but he saw him with his heart. But the issue of the ru'ya, the seeing of Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah, do they differ? What do they differ about? Whether the Prophet ﷺ saw him or not. So the actual ru'ya is the asl of the issue. That's the aqidah. That's the foundation and asl in the aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Whoever denies that, after knowing the ahadith and the ayat and the ijma', then he has left the fold of Islam. If he denies it. After knowing, meaning after he understands, and he has not understands, but he has been shown the proof, and the proof has been made clear to him. If he denies the ru'ya after that Allah will be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah, after the iqamatul hujjah, he has left the fold of Islam. Why? Because he has denied something from the usul of the aqidah, after the iqamatul hujjah, after the ayat, which I'm sure the brother mentioned in his dars, after the ahadith. Right? So therefore, in the usul of the aqidah, Sahaba did not differ. The only thing they differed upon, did the Prophet see him or not see him whilst he was alive in this world? That's the difference. Meaning that when he ascended in the night of Isra and Mi'raj, did he see Allah or not? A group said yes, a group said no. A group said no, he saw him with his heart, meaning, Allah, he saw Allah in a vision from his heart, but he did not see him with his eyes, and so on. So the aqidah is agreed upon. So when these madhabs came later, like today, they say, what are you? He says, I'm Hanafi. Alright, Hanafi. He says, I'm Hanafi. Take it. Hanafi in what? He says, I'm Hanafi in fiqh. I follow the Hanafi madhab. But in aqidah, I am Maturidi. Alright? Jayyid. In aqidah, he says, I am Maturidi. He says, in tariqah, I am Naqshbandi. So far we got 3. Alright? In my political outlook, I am Ikhwani. So now, all of a sudden, where's the Hanafi underneath all of that? Underneath all of that mess? Where's the Hanafi in you? Why can't you be Hanafi in Aqidah, Hanafi in fiqh, Hanafi in outlook, Hanafi in tariqah, and then you will find that when you hear what Abu Hanifa said, you'd actually be Salafi, because Abu Hanifa was upon the way of the Salaf and Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Just like the Shafi'is and the Malikis. There's an innovator in the United States of America. He says, I am Maliki in madhab, meaning fiqh. Sahawardi in tariqah, Sufi, Quburi, grave worshipper. So, as it relates to my spirituality, he is Sahawardi. Right? And then he carries on, layer upon layer upon layer, adding, he says in Aqidah, I am Ash'ari. So he is Shafi'i, Sahawardi, what's the third one? Ash'ari, and fourthly, he will say that I am Tablighi, on top of all of that. Why the layers on top of the Imam's madhab? If you are following the Imam's madhab, then what year did we say that Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari died? 324. Right? Imam Shafi'i died 204. Nearly a century and a half before, a century and more, before Abu Hassan's appearance, Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, Imam Shafi'i was the Mujaddid, Imam, Ahlul Hadith, Ahlus-Sunnah, from the Mujaddideen of his era, Mujaddid, the reviver of the deen of his time, Imam Shafi'i. So why would you take Imam Shafi'i in fiqh, how you make wudu and how you pray, but you're not going to take the aqidah of Shafi'i? Shafi'i wasn't Ash'ari. How can Shafi'i be Ash'ari when Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari came a century after him? How is that possible? You're following a man who hasn't appeared yet? So Shafi was an Ash'ari. He was not an Ash'ari. So why don't you take in Aqidah, be Shafi'i. In fiqh, be Shafi'i. And what did Shafi'i say? If you find my opinion contradicting the hadith of Allah's Messenger, then take my opinion and throw it against the wall and go to the hadith of Allah's Messenger. Then you'll be true Shafi'i. إذا صح الحديث هو مذهبي, as Imam Shafi'i used to say. If the hadith is authentic, that is my madhab. So now you can be Shafi'i in fiqh, you can be Shafi'i in Aqidah, you can be Shafi'i in your manhaj methodology, which is not to rebel and not to follow the paths of Ikhwan al-Muflisin or the Khawarij or the Mu'tazila and the Shia and so on. Be Shafi'i in everything. What do you mean you're Shafi'i, Ash'ari, Sahawardi, Tablighi, and Ash'ari or Maturidi? Okay. This is where Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah don't have these layers to deceive the people with. We say we are Salafi. Say, what do you mean Salafi? The Kitab, Sunnah, Sahaba, and the great Imams of the early Salaf. This is what we're upon. Say, but you already agreed that the early Imams differed. Yes, they agreed and they differed in fiqh. So what do you do when they differ in fiqh? We say, we look at what the Imams have said, whichever one brings the authentic hadith from Bukhari or Muslim, even though Bukhari and Muslim came after them. But the narrations, the Sahab, those Imam narrated the narrations. If those narrations are authentic according to the Muhaddithin that came a century after them or a generation after them, like Imam al-Bukhari died in 256, or Imam Tirmidhi who died in 279, and so on from the A'imma, then we will take the hadith that is authentic from them. As long as that madhab or that Imam gives it ijtihad, like those two Sahaba, the one who made tayammum by striking the hand and the one who rolled, which one is the haqq out of the two? Answer me. Right? The one who made tayammum. Do we now negate the virtue of the other Sahabi and say, well, who was he? Do we say that? No. We say, no, he's rewarded. Radiyallahu anhu. And we love him for the sake of Allah because he was an Imam from the Sahaba radiyallahu anhu. Even if he was mistaken, why? Because he made ijtihad. But if the ijtihad was incorrect according to the Prophet ﷺ, then what do? We go to Rasulullah. Is that not true? So when two Sahaba they differ in doing something, then what did Allah command them to do? فَإِذَا تَنَازَعْتُمْ فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. If you differ in any affair between yourselves, then refer it back to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the Salafi is complete in his understanding of all of these affairs. This is the first point at which all of those Ash'aris, Sufis, Maturidis and whatever layers that they have, Tablighi, Diyobandi and whatever they have, all of that we strip it away. That's why the Salafi doesn't accept the title of Wahhabi. We're not Wahhabi. We are Salafi because we follow the Salaf, Sahaba, Rasulullah, Sahaba and the early generations. We don't ascribe ourselves. If we are not going to ascribe ourselves to Imam Shafi'i and say we are Shafi'i and everything Shafi'i, blindly, even if he's mistaken. No, we don't accept that. Not from Shafi'i, not from Malik, not from any of them. No, we love them and we revere them. Rahimahumullah ta'ala jami'an. But as it relates to this, if we do not take a single one of them to be followed, and all of those great Imams are greater than Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul-Wāhid rahimahullah. They're greater than him. Because they are from the earlier generations. That's why the Salafi won't say, we are Albaniyun. We are not Albaniyun. Barakallahu feekum. We are Salafi. Or we are Sunni. Or we are Athari. Because all of these terms refer to the same thing. And we are definitely not Wahhabi. Though we love Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Just as we love Muhammad Idris al-Shafi'i. Just as we love Ahmad bin Muhammad ibn Hanbal. Yes, we love these A'imma. But we do not take a single person that you can call. That's why the Salafi he will become upset that he's called Wahhabi. Not because we have a problem with Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, because we read his books and we teach his books. Just like we teach the books of Abdul-Ghani al-Maqdisi, and we teach the books of Imam al-Barbahari, and we teach the books of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and we teach the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and ibn Qayyim. But we are not blind followers that we have to ta'assub towards one that now we are labeled with that label, or that we are happy with that label, unlike them. That they are happy to be called Ash'ari, which is the madhab of bid'ah. Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab is upon the Sunnah, and we don't accept being called Wahhabi, though he is upon the Sunnah. The madhab of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari is upon bid'ah, and they're proud to announce it to the people. How is that even possible? It's tanaqud, it's contradiction. Let's go back to Abdullah ibn Kullab, because that's where the story begins. Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah mentioned regarding him in his Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. Imam al-Dhahabi has a voluminous work, over 30 volumes, where he narrates the stories and the lives of the notable people in history. So he mentions Abdullah ibn Kullab. He said he was a leader of the people of theological rhetoric, the mutakallimin. So he was the leader, the imam of the mutakallimin, the people of rhetoric, meaning innovative speech, of Basra in his time. And his name was Abdullah bin Sa'id ibn Kullab al-Qattan al-Basri. He had some writings refuting the Mu'tazila, so he refuted other sects of bid'ah, though he himself was upon bid'ah. And perhaps, even though he was refuting them, he agreed with them in aspects. Dawood al-Zahiri learnt kalam, rhetoric from him, as was stated by Abu Tahir al-Duhali. It is said that Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, who was refuted by Imam Ahmad, remember the era of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It is said that Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, who became an opponent of Imam Ahmad, that he studied the sciences of logic and debate from Abdullah ibn Kullab. This is all from Imam al-Dhahabi, summarized. He was called Ibn Kullab, that became his name, meaning that's what he was generally known as. He was able, due to his eloquence, to debate and to draw his opponent to himself, meaning to his opinion and to his logic and to his debating skills. His followers were known as the Kullabiyya. They are the followers of Abdullah ibn Kullab. Some of them consider Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari to be among them. Ibn Kullab would refute the Jahmiyyah. See, what's happening here is that they're refuting each other, the various sects. So Kullab is refuting the Mu'tazila, though he has some of the ideas of the Mu'tazila. He is himself teaching logic and rhetoric in opposition to the Kitab and the Sunnah to some of his students, from them Al-Muhasibi. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who died a century later, it is said that he is from them, from the Kullabiyya. Ibn Kullab would refute the Jahmiyyah. He believed, Ibn Kullab, that the Quran was a singular entity, established with the self of Allah, not tied neither to the ability of Allah, nor to the Mashi'ah of Allah, nor to the will of Allah. So he believed that this was the Quran. And then Imam al-Dhahabi said, no one ever had preceded him this aqidah that he brought from himself. He said this in order to resist those who said that the Quran was created. So what was his idea? I want to refute the Jahmiyyah. I want to refute the Mu'tazila. So what did he do? Instead of following the madhab of Ahlus-Sunnah, he used logic and kalam to come up with this idea. He believed that the Quran was a singular entity, established with the self of Allah, kalam nafsi. And it was not tied, meaning the Quran itself is not connected to the ability nor the will of Allah. It is just a singular entity with Allah. Exactly what Ash'ari is saying today. Where did they get it from? Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari or Ibn Kullab? Ibn Kullab. Ibn Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he mentioned in Lisan al-Mizan, volume 4, summarized from him, from Al-Hakim in his Tariq, that Ibn Khuzaymah Rahimahullah Ta'ala, from the great A'imma of Aqidah and Sunnah and Hadith of his time, Ibn Khuzaymah Rahimahullah, that Ibn Khuzaymah used to criticize the madhab of the Kullabiyya, the followers of Abdullah ibn Kullab. And he said, Ibn Khuzaymah said that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was the severest of people in criticism of Abdullah ibn Kullab and his students. So who refuted him? Imam Ahmad refuted Abdullah ibn Kullab. It is said that he was called Ibn Kullab because he was able to seize the one who he was debating with. So he would look for loopholes in their argument because he's a debater. He knows how to debate. Right? He studied debate and logic and argumentation. So when he was in front of a person, he knew, even if they speak with the Quran and Sunnah, I will use my skills in debate and manipulation to turn the argument and seize the one who I'm talking to. That's why the Salaf, you say, don't argue with the people of Kalam. Because they've studied debate and logic and argumentation. And they learned it, the writings of the Greeks and so on, from the writings of Plato and Aristotle and so on. So they learned how to debate and how to argue. So a person is coming to you with a hadith. And the person is a sincere person. This is a hadith and this is the ayah. So what he wants to do, he wants to now break down the ayah and start manipulating its meaning and its wording from language, from logic, from intellect, from cosmology, from looking at the universe. And before the man, he said, I only quoted you a hadith. Where are you going with this? Right? This is how they used to do. This is what they used to do. So Imam Ahmad refuted him. As Ibn Khuzaymah said, he was refuted. Ibn Kullab was refuted by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal refutes you. What does that make you? In Aqidah. That makes you a person of deviation. Why? Because that was the era of the rise of the Mu'tazila, under which scholars were killed and tortured and beaten and imprisoned. In the issue of what? In the issues of Asma wa Sifat, in the Tawheed of Allah's names and attributes. So when Imam Ahmad came and Ibn Kullab was calling to what he was calling to, Imam Ahmad refuted him, and he refuted Hasibi, and he refuted anyone who was upon the Aqeedah of Ibn Kullab. As for the claim, and then he mentions, to skip because of the timing, in the biography of Shaykh al-Islam, Muhammad bin Ishaq as-Siraj, he was the muhaddith or the scholar of hadith of Khurasan of his time, and he died in 313 after the Hijrah. We're still talking early times. Imam al-Dhahabi said that Abu Sa'id ibn Abi Bakr said that when the affair of the Kullabiyya struck the city of Naysabur, right, which is east of Iraq, when the idea and the ideologies of Ibn Kullab in opposing the Aqidah, look what he said about the Quran. He brought an idea about the Quran and a belief about the Quran that no one had ever said before him. But now this methodology and this ideology that he's spreading of tahrif and distortion and changing that which the Quran and that which the Sunnah speaks with regard to the Aqidah, differing from the likes of Imam Malik, differing from the likes of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, differing from the likes of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, Sa'id ibn Musayyib and Ibn Awn and Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani. Now he's come with something new. That's just one example with what he said about the Quran, that it is a singular entity and Allah does not speak with will. Rather, it was a single entity with Allah, established with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this now becomes widespread. By 1313, Ibn Kullab dead. Died in when? 240. Imam Ahmad has passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. So now the ideas of Ibn Kullab are being carried by his students and by a group of individuals who followed this, the mutakallimin and the, what they understood from Ibn Kullab of kalam and rhetoric and so on. So these A'imma now have to deal with these mubtadi'ah, with these Ahlul Bidah, that they've come with this new Aqidah that Imam Ahmad didn't know of. And he, in fact, that which he knew of it, he refuted it. So in Naysabur, when the fitna of Kullabiyya struck, Muhammad bin Ishaq as-Siraj, this Shaykh al-Islam, this Imam who died in 313, he said that I will not narrate to the children of the Kullabiyya. I will not narrate to them, I will not teach them. Why? Because if I teach them and they learn something of the Sharia, their parents will take them away and build them upon the ideas of Kullabiyya, upon the ideas of Ibn Kullab. So they'll have knowledge of the Sharia, they'll have the thinking in Aqeedah of the Kullabiyya, and they'll use it as a weapon against Ahlus-Sunnah. So he said, I'm not going to teach them. Up until he made them stand and he would test them first. He would make imtihan of them. So he said, meaning Abu Sa'id ibn Abi Bakr, Abu Sa'id ibn Abi Bakr, he said, so I was a young boy at the time. So he said to me, and he made me stand up. Shaykh al-Islam, Muhammad bin Ishaq al-Siraj, he made me stand up. And he said to me, Repeat after me. I am free in front of Allah from the kullabiyah. He made the children say that. Say, I am free in front of Allah from the kullabiyah. He said, I was a young boy and I said to him, if I was to say that, my father would not give me bread to eat. So then, Muhammad bin Ishaq as-Siraj, he started laughing at the boy. And he said, this one, leave him alone. He's with us. He just, if he says it, he won't even get food in his house. But the point is that the A'imma of the Salaf, that they understood where this methodology and where this Aqidah is leading. So Ibn Kullab, Abdullah ibn Kullab, was not upon the Aqidah of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Who was the measure of the time? Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad was the one who faced the mehna of the Quran being created. He was the one who was beaten and imprisoned for 18 months. And he was tortured. And they wanted to kill him. Imam Ahmad, over and over again, he suffered, but he remained steadfast. So Ibn Kullab was not upon the Aqeedah of Imam Ahmad, and the proof that Ahmad ibn Hanbal refuted him, rahimahullah. He was not upon the madhab of the Salaf. Ibrahim bin Ahmad, Ibn Shaqala al-Hanbali, who died in 369. Now we're moving 120 years after the death, or thereabouts, after the death of Ibn Kullab. That he was talking to a person who was upon the Aqeedah of Ibn Kullab, and his name was Abu Sulaiman al-Damishqi. So Ibn Shaqala said to him, he narrated to him the hadith of Sulaiman, the hadith of Abu Sulaiman, narrated to Abu Sulaiman, this follower of Ibn Kullab. He narrated to him the hadith of Anas ibn Malik, the companion, radiyallahu anhu, wherein the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that indeed, between the two fingers of Allah, the hearts are between the two fingers of Allah, and He turns them as He wills. That the hearts are between the two fingers of Allah. So Abu Sulaiman, who was upon the Aqeedah of Ibn Kullab, now this is when, over a century after Ibn Kullab, showing that the ideology has spread. So Abu Sulaiman said to him, but those two fingers of Allah are His two bounties. So Ibn Shaqala said to him, does the narration mention that the two fingers are the two bounties of Allah? He said that you rebuke him. But why have you added a word into the hadith that isn't there? The hearts are between the two fingers of Allah. You've just said those two fingers are the two bounties of Allah. Where did you get the two bounties from? The hadith doesn't say that. He said no, it doesn't say that. So he continued. The two hands. So he corrected him and then he rebuked him. He said the two hands are attributes of Allah's self, of Allah's dhat. And no one proceeded in what you have just said except Abdullah ibn Kullab al-Qattan. He is the one whose madhab that you have embraced. How dare you add two bounties, that the two hands of Allah and the two bounties of Allah. You've taken this from Ibn Kullab, and no consideration is given to the interpretation. You have mentioned that the hearts of the servants are between the two bounties of Allah, from the bounties of Allah. How dare, or between the two fingers rather. That how dare you change that the hearts of mankind are between the two fingers of Allah. How dare you change that to mean that the hearts of mankind are between the two bounties of Allah. Allah's hadith, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentions the fingers of Allah. You have mentioned the bounties of Allah. Where do you get the bounties of Allah from? You are following the madhab of Ibn Kullab. So he refuted him. So then he continued, your madhab is that the speech of Allah contains no command or prohibition, no ambiguous verses, no abrogating verses, no abrogated verses. Because you believe that the speech of Allah cannot be heard. Because according to you, meaning Ibn Kullab, who you have taken from, because according to you, Allah does not speak with a voice. And that Musa did not hear the speech of Allah with his own hearing. And you believe that Allah created within Musa an understanding with which he understood. That this is what your madhab is of Ibn Kullab. Why? Because in each one of these points, he's refuting them. He's refuting them. So he said, in your idea, why? Because the Quran to them is one entity. And it is qa'im. It is established with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah does not speak with a will. Allah does not, the Quran, rather, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Quran is not in accordance to the ability of Allah or the will of Allah. It is just one entity. Allah does not speak with a voice or with words or with letters. This is the belief of those kullabiyah. So he said, if you are on this belief, then you have to say that no verse abrogated another verse. Because how does abrogation take place? Allah reveals a verse, and then a situation comes, and Allah repeals that verse and replaces it with another verse. That's abrogation. How does that happen except by the will of Allah? Right? Just like the manner in which alcohol was eventually, it was allowed, and it was frowned upon, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them not to approach the prayer whilst in a state of drunkenness, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited it in layers, yani in stages. According to you, if you say that the Quran is a singular entity, then you hold that there's no abrogation. You also therefore must believe that the speech of Allah cannot be heard. Why? Because Allah does not speak according to them. So when Allah mentioned the Quran that Allah spoke to Musa directly, you don't hold that Allah spoke to Musa directly. And you hold that Musa did not hear the speech of Allah, even though Allah mentioned the Quran, that Allah spoke to Musa directly. And you believe, therefore, this is what the belief of them is, that Allah did not speak to Musa. The meaning of it is that Allah placed into the heart, or within Musa, Allah created within him an understanding of what Allah wanted. Look what they have to deny. This is the Kullabiyah. So when he, Abu Sulaiman, saw what Ibn Kullab was upon, and he heard what this Shaykh was saying to him of repulsive and ugly beliefs of Ibn Kullab, he said, I hope by opposing Ibn Kullab in this issue, I have opposed his madhab totally. Meaning that when he heard this scholar saying this to him, he left it. And he said, I agree, by me agreeing with you in this issue, I hope that I've just left Ibn Kullab and his madhab completely. This is in the Tabaqat of Al-Hanabila volume 2. So Ibn Kullab innovated the doctrine of the speech of Allah as a single entity. We're coming to Abu Hassan in a moment, inshallah. So Ibn Kullab invented the doctrine and the aqidah of the speech of Allah as a single entity, a single meaning, established and present with the dhat of Allah, without voice. They said Allah did not speak with a voice, and does not speak with a voice, and He does not speak with letters, which is what the Ash'aris today and the Kullabis of that time and of this time, this is what they refer to as kalam nafsi. Even today, they say, what about the Quran? They say, yeah, kalam nafsi. This is what they're talking about. The thing that the Salaf used to refute, and Ibn Kullab was refuted for. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala stated in the 8th century, he died in 752, he said Ibn Kullab came and he broke the ijma' of even Ahlul Bid'ah. Meaning that even Ahlul Bid'ah wasn't upon what he was upon. He broke their ijma' by innovating the affair of the speech established in the self, the kalam nafsi. And in that he also opposed the revelation, the naql, meaning the revelation from Allah. And he opposed the aql, the intellect. And he opposed the fitra, the innate nature. And he opposed the urf of the Arabic language, the norms of the Arabic language. He came with something that was not known from anyone before him. And with this, he resembled the Christians in the affair of the Trinity. With these kind of like vague, there's nothing defined in his aqidah. Kalam nafsi. What do you mean kalam nafsi? Speak with the speech of the Quran and the Sunnah and the Sahaba and the early Salaf. This was Ibn Kullab. So Ibn Taymiyyah said, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, that he ascribed himself to the saying of Ibn Kullab for this reason. And for this reason rather, so Al-Muhasibi came along, and Muhasibi was in the same era as Ibn Kullab. Imam Ahmed now is waging a war against them. When they start talking about kalam nafsi, and that the speech of Allah is a singular entity, and Allah does not speak with words, or with letters, or with a voice that was heard by the likes of Musa alayhi salam, or by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam on the night of Mi'raj. So Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, ascribed himself to the saying of Ibn Kullab, and for this reason Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal ordered that Al-Muhasibi be boycotted, and Ahmad would warn against Ibn Kullab and his followers. So now this is the foundation of the Ash'ari madhab. But they don't call themselves Kullabiyya today. What do they call themselves? We're Ash'ari. And they say that the madhab of the Ash'a'ira is the madhab of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You read it in their books. When they write their Aqidah, they say that the madhab of Ahlus-Sunnah is the madhab of the Ash'a'ira. The Ash'aris are Ahlus-Sunnah. How can the Ash'aris be Ahlus-Sunnah when Imam Ahmad refuted the founder of the Ash'a'ira, Abdullah ibn Kullab, and the A'imma, they refuted them? And I've just mentioned just a handful of narrations, even though if we continued, it would take weeks just to finish that section. Let us now talk about the rise of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari himself, because this is the Ash'ari madhab. His early i'tizal and then his repentance from his false belief at the end of his life, because he went through stages in his life. The Ash'ari madhab follows the doctrine of kalam, the same theological rhetoric, putting the Quran and the Sunnah to their own intellect and their own ideas and their own philosophies, and then coming up with their own aqidah in opposition to the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So it appeared after the first three generations, the Ash'ari madhab. That's the first thing that you must understand. They know that, and we know that. The Ash'ari madhab, by default and by necessity, appeared after the first three generations. Anyone know why? It's obvious. Because Abul Hasan Ash'ari died 329. So even if we assume that you are Ash'ari, because they say proudly, we are Ash'ari. So if you are Ash'ari, then when did Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari die? 324. If he died in 324, then the madhab that you are following, and you say that it is his madhab that we are following, we are Ash'ari in terms of our aqidah, then you are following a man who came 3 centuries after Rasulullah. Right? So it is late. It is 3 centuries later. They ascribe themselves to Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, and they regard him as their founder of their madhab. Al-Ash'ari was a staunch Mu'tazili in his early years, until he reached the age of 40 years of his life. He was a Mu'tazili with the Mubtadi'ah, a Mubtadi', an innovator, refuted by ijma' by Ahlul Hadith and Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The Mu'tazila were finished in the eyes of Ahlus-Sunnah, without exception. Finished. What was he for 40 years? Mu'tazili. That's 40 years of his life. Then around the year 300, he's 40 years old, then he switched to the madhab of the Kullabiyya. So he switched from an extreme ideology of the Mu'tazila, which is denial of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, denial that the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have a meaning, to know that they have an effect upon the creation. They're in denial of that. Right? So they deny all of the attributes of Allah, and they deny the meanings of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the Mu'tazila. So now he leaves that madhab, and then he comes what he sees to be more correct, which is what? Ibn Kullab. So he said, okay, Ibn Kullab refuted the Mu'tazila, and he came with his own ideas. I like those ideas, so he took them. So then he became Kullabi at what age? 40. So then he switched to the ideology of the Kullabiyya, which was, as we have mentioned above, founded by Abdullah ibn Kullab, less than a century before Abul Hasan changed. Right? What year did he die? 240. In 300, 60 years later, at the age of 40, he becomes, because he wasn't even alive when Ibn Kullab died. So 60 years later, 60 years after the death of Ibn Kullab, Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari is 40 years old. At the age of 40, he leaves the Mu'tazila, and he becomes a follower of the ideology of Ibn Kullab. And we already know what Imam Ahmad felt about both the Mu'tazila and Ibn Kullab, and what Imam al-Bukhari felt about, or what he said about the Mu'tazila, and what he said about the ideology of the Kullabiyya in their various writings and works, like the Aqidah of Imam al-Bukhari and the Aqidah of Sufyan al-Thawri. Even though Sufyan al-Thawri came before Ibn Kullab, but he refuted the Mu'tazila, and they refuted the Jahmiyyah, because the Jahmiyyah came about, Jahm bin Safwan was executed in 128. His teacher Jad ibn Dirham was executed in 124 because of their bid'ah. because it became so prevalent and so dangerous that the rulers, they gave the ruling, these two have to be killed. So they executed Ja'd ibn Dirham, 124, and they executed Jahm bin Safwan in 128. They were executed, both of them. But the remnants of their belief, it remained. And then, as with normal bid'ah, all types of bid'ah, and you see today, someone comes with a bid'ah, 3 weeks later, it's morphed into something else. Right? So they bring a bid'ah, maybe in hijab, or maybe in some ideology, and before you know it, it's kind of like morphed into something else. This is Ahlul Bid'ah, because Ahlul Bid'ah, they have no... Ahlus-Sunnah, we have usul. Quran, Sunnah, Sahaba. So there's always something that we can fall back upon and say, no, it's there and it's not going any further. Ahlul Bid'ah already have it in their head that you can change and flux and change and morph and metamorphosize into anything that you want. So what stops them? There's no limit to Bid'ah. We want to celebrate the birthday of Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because it feels good. Okay? Actually, we'll do a disco to go along with it. Why not? Because if you're going to do one, why not move to the other? What stops you? If there's no limit and there's no fallback, then what prevents you? We're going to have a big birthday cake. And you've seen what they do with birthday cakes, right? If you haven't. It's crazy, they'll bring like a big wedding cake that the kuffar have on their weddings. And they'll say, well, they have big cakes on their weddings and birthdays. We love him even more. Our cake's going to be even bigger. And we'll put gulab jamuns on the top of it. With candles. And they do. With candles coming out. And they light up the candles. One for each century since he passed away. Or one for every generation. And they'll stand there blowing it out. Why? Because there's no fallback, right? If you have nothing that stops you, then you're going to just carry on. So this is what happened with them. Once they start, the Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazila, then they metamorphosize, and they change, and they adapt, and then they refute each other. Well, you shouldn't have gone that far. Why not? You went that far. Why can't I go any further? No, you went too far. Okay, I'll stay back. Because there's no fallback, right? It's all about logic and argumentation, debating who can get the greatest number of followers. Whereas the Salafi says, and the scholar and the person of Hadith, Ahlul Hadith, he says, no, I just stop at the Hadith, Akhi. And they think you're boring. Right? They think, well, why just stop at Hadith? Why not? Why can't we go any further? This is bid'ah, either bid'ah asliyah or bid'ah idafiyah. Either they will take something from the revelation and distort it and add to it and make bid'ah out of it, or they'll just invent from nothing, like the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ, invented from nothing. Just plucked it out the air. Well, they have Christmas, let's do Eid Milad. It's just plucked out the air. Right? Other types of bid'ah have a foundation, meaning that they're trying to use something in the Sharia as a basis to do their bid'ah. So this is what they did. Ibn Taymiyyah said, rahimahullah.
No, we have time to start.
Okay. Ibn Taymiyyah said the saying that the Quran, this is the words of Ibn Taymiyyah refuting the Kullabiyah. The saying that the Quran is from eternity, not with a voice, not with letters, and it is not except a single entity or meaning present with the self of Allah, then it is correct to state that this saying this is the saying of the Ash'ariyah, because they admit to it even now. Right? It is a single entity. Allah does not have a voice, and Allah does not speak with a voice. Allah does not speak with letters. It is not except a single entity with the self of Allah. Then it is correct to say that this is the saying of the Ash'aris, the Ash'ariyah. But the first to utter this in Islam was Abdullah ibn Qullah. Ash'aris took it from Abu Hasan Ash'ari took it from him. Then Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, and the Salaf and the Imams, the Salaf and the great scholars, they would affirm for Allah what is established with the self of Allah, with the Dhat of Allah, of His attributes. And they affirm the actions of Allah that are connected to the will of Allah and His power. So they would establish for Allah, Allah's attributes that are connected to that are affirmed with Allah and established with the Dhat of Allah. Like Allah's hearing, Allah's seeing, Dhat of Allah. Then there are those attributes of Allah that are connected to the will of Allah, to the Mashiach of Allah, like the ascending of Allah. Right? Allah's istiwa. You've done ulu already today. So Allah ascended over His throne. So the istiwa of Allah, and this attribute of Allah, al-istiwa, is connected to the will of Allah. Allah does it whenever He wills. whenever He wills, as He wills. The how we don't know, because He never told us how He ascended over the throne, as Imam Malik, when he was asked by that innovator. He said, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arshi istawa. Kayfa istawa? When Imam Malik was asked that Allah said in the Quran, the man said to Imam Malik, Allah said in the Quran that Allah has ascended over His throne. How did He ascend over the throne? So Imam Malik said, Al-Istiwa ma'loom. The istiwa, it is the ascending of Allah over the throne, it is known. Wal-Kayf majhul. How He ascended, it is not known. And I do not see you except as an وَسُؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدْعَةٌ. And to question the istiwa of Allah, the ascendant of Allah over His throne, then this question is a question that is innovative. We just affirm what Allah has said. We don't say how. Your question is a question that is a bid'ah. I do not see you except as an innovator, or in a narration as an evil person. Get out of my circle. Removed him. Because he knew that this man had come, maybe not for Imam, but for the rest of the people to be deceived by him. So he removed him. But the Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said that the Salaf of this ummah would affirm for Allah the attributes of the self, for Allah, the attributes that are established with the dhat of Allah. And they affirm the actions that are connected to the will of Allah, like Allah speaks whenever He wills. But the speech of Allah is also from the attributes dhatiyah, the sifat al-dhatiyah, from the sifat al-dhatiyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that Allah can never be ceased to be described with speaking. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks, and He's never ceased to be described with the attribute of speaking. Allah sees, and He's never ceased to be described as being the all-seeing. Allah is the all-hearing, as-sami', and Allah is never ceased to be described as being the all-hearing. But as for al-istiwa, the ascension of Allah, and the nuzul of Allah, the descending of Allah, and the maji' of Allah, the coming of Allah yawm al-qiyamah, then these are all connected to the will of Allah. Allah ascends when He wills, and Allah descends when He wills. When does Allah will to descend? When? The last third of every night. Allah descends to the nearest heaven in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, mutawatira. Hadith are established in numerous narrations. And Allah descends on the day of Arafah, as is mentioned in one hadith. So then Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah mentioned that the Jahmiyyah denied both of this. They denied both of these, meaning the attributes of Allah that are established with the dhat of Allah, and the attributes of Allah and the actions of Allah that are connected to the will of Allah and His power. The Jahmiyyah founder, what's his name? Jahm bin Safwan, executed, mentioned it, right? That's what I said at the beginning, you have to listen. 128 he was executed. So what does he say? The Jahmiyyah denied both of this. So Ibn Kullab agreed with the Salaf that the Jahmiyyah are wrong. So Ibn Kullab, he agreed with the Salaf in the establishment of the eternal attributes of the self. So he agreed that the Jahmiyyah were wrong, and he affirmed the eternal attributes of Allah, like seeing, hearing, and so on, because these are established with Allah, with His dhat, never cease to be described with them, right? But he rejected the fact that they are attributes established with Allah that are connected to His will and power. So he accepted one half of what the Salaf were upon and what the Quran and Sunnah calls to, and rejected the other half. So in one half, he rejected the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. In the other half, he came up with his own ideas. Then Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah mentions, and then came Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari after him. And he was the student of Abu Ali al-Jubai, the Mu'tazili. What did we say? Up until the age of 40, what was he? Mu'tazili. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Thereafter, Abu al-Hasan retracted from the saying of the Mu'tazila. He realized in the year 300, actually, 40 years I've been following these innovators, and I've been wrong. So he changed. So he refuted them. He explained their contradictions in many places. And he went to extreme lengths, Shaykh al-Islam said. He went to extreme lengths in opposition of them in the issue of qadr and iman and al-wa'ad, which is the promises of Allah of reward, and the wa'id of Allah, which are the threats of Allah's punishment, until they, due to this, ascribed to Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, meaning that when he refuted the Mu'tazila, because these are the arenas where the Mu'tazila went to extremes and in innovation. So he refuted them, he left them, but he did not just leave them, he left them and said, I know them. So he started refuting them. So he refuted them in their deviation, the affair of qadr, and the affair of iman, and the affair of the promises of Allah, and the affair of the wa'id of Allah, right? Because these are other issues that the Mu'tazila, they fell to error with. So then what happened was, up until when they saw what he'd done to them, they ascribed to Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, they refuted him back, and they called him Murji, and Jabari, and from the Waqifa, meaning in the issue of Quran, those who do not take the position that they take. And in the arena of the attributes, Al-Ash'ari, when he left the Mu'tazila, he took the path of Ibn Kullab. That's what he did, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. So this saying concerning the Quran is the saying of Ibn Kullab. What saying? That the speech of Allah, or the Quran, is and the speech of Allah is kalam nafsi. It is an entity established with the self of Allah, not connected to the will of Allah. Allah does not speak when He wills, because there's no attribute of Allah, the action of Allah that is connected to the will of Allah. We say that Allah ascended over the throne, and Allah spoke to Musa when Allah willed to speak to Musa. They don't accept that. They don't say that Allah spoke to Musa when Allah willed. They said that Allah created into Musa an understanding. So they want to reject the fact that Allah spoke at a particular place and time and location with Musa. That's the belief. That's in the Quran. Right? He spoke to Musa at a particular location, at a particular time, at a particular appointed location that Musa went to, or Musa was going through. They reject all this because they say no. What must have happened? Because they rejected that side of the attributes of Allah, that Allah does what He wills whenever He wills in those attributes of Allah that are known as the sifat fi'liya. Meaning that they are attributes of Allah that Allah does whenever He wills. They said no, there's no such thing as Allah doing what He wills whenever He wills. They don't accept that. Right? Whereas the Salaf, they did. The Quran speaks of that. The Hadith speak of that. The Sahaba speak of that. The Tabi'een speak of that. The Atba'u Tabi'een speak of that. The books of Aqidah of the Salaf are filled with this. They don't want to accept it, and there's a reason why. But that's a different discussion. Right? So they came back and refuted Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari when he left the Mu'tazila. So then Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari thought, what next? So then he was convinced by Abdullah ibn Kullab. That's Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. So the saying concerning the Quran, this saying concerning the Quran is the saying of Ibn Kullab in origin, that the Ash'ari speak of today in 2019 or in 1440. The Ash'ari still speak with this today. Where do you get this from? What do they say? I wish the Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, this is the mother of Ahlus-Sunnah. Whose is it really? Ibn Kullab. They got it from Ibn Kullab because he was the first one to speak with it. So when Abu al-Hasan had nowhere else to go, when he left the Mu'tazila, he latched on to the Aqidah of who? Abdullah ibn Kullab. So this is what Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah said, that this is the saying in its origin of Ibn Kullab, and it is the saying of those who followed him, such as Al-Ash'ari. Al-Ash'ari was a follower of Ibn Kullab and others. Majmu' al-Fatawa of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, volume 12. So the Kullabiyya and then the Ash'ari, they tried to carve for themselves a niche between Ahlus-Sunnah and the Mu'tazila. They don't want to come all the way to the people of Sunnah, and they don't want to be with the Mu'tazila. So they carve for themselves a niche between Ahlus-Sunnah and the Mu'tazila. Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam al-Dhahabi, al-Miqrizi, and others stated that Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari left the madhab of the Mu'tazila and then he adopted the views of Ibn Kullab. Then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah stated, the closer a person is to the era of the Salaf, the more knowledgeable he is in comprehending and transmitting that which is correct. So the closer you are, the more likely you are, as long as you take from those A'imma of Hadith and Sunnah and Sahaba and Tabi'een, the closer you are to being correct. And then Ibn Taymiyyah said, and I affirm this for the Hanbali madhab. I affirm this for the Hanbali madhab. That's what we said at the beginning. Out of the four madhabs, it was the one that was the most robust. When the bid'ah came, it stood the firmest. It doesn't say that all of them did, because some of them did deviate. But it was the madhab that was the closest to the hadith. And he was the fourth out of the four imams, the latest of them. And the closest of them to the era of the compilation of the books of hadith, in authenticity and so on. From the students of Imam Ahmad was Bukhari, for example. Right? And Imam Shafi'i took from Imam Ahmad, and he praised Imam Ahmad for his knowledge. He goes, you have excelled me in hadith. So that was the era of Imam Ahmad. So the Hanbalis and the students of Imam Ahmad and those who came later, they were more robust in meeting the challenge of Ahlul Bid'ah. Why? Because they were closer to the hadith of Prophet and its authenticity. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, and I affirm this for the Hanbali madhab, and I can clarify that Al-Ash'ari was from the students of the Mu'tazila, and then he repented from that, and because he was a student of Al-Juba'i the Mu'tazili. However, he left that for the path of Ibn Kullab. Then he took knowledge, because now he entered into the third stage of the life of Al-Ash'ari. Why? Because he's seeking the truth. He realizes I was wrong for 40 years. Then he comes to Ibn Kullab and he thinks I found the truth. Then he bumps into who? Scholars of Hadith. Scholars of Hadith. So he took knowledge in the science of Hadith from Zakaria as-Saji in Basra. Then when he arrived in Baghdad, he took knowledge from the Hanbalis in Baghdad in the subjects of religion. So now we enter the third phase of the life of who are we talking about? I just want to make sure you're still with me, right? Who? Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. We're entering into this is Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. So after being with the Mu'tazila for 40 years, then he was with Ibn Kullab. Then he starts seeking knowledge of Hadith, because where else are you going to go after the Mu'tazila? Mu'tazila don't want Hadith. He's now decided, actually we need to go back to the revelation. Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. So he's listening to Ibn Kullab, or listening to the writings and the students of Ibn Kullab, or what remains from his ideology that was widespread. And then he decides, I want to seek Hadith. So he starts seeking Hadith, and he ends up in Baghdad, taking knowledge from the Hanbalis, which is the most robust madhab in Aqeedah. Hanbalis is the most resistant to bid'ah, right? And then he said, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 3, and this was the final affair that he died upon. And he himself and his companions stated this in their books, right? So that's Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. That's who they claim that they're following. What we do, Ahl-Hadith, Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Salaf. Look how they're meandering, one place to another. Now, they go to Imam Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, their Imam. They say, however, and this is what we say, however, the Ash'aris of later times, up until today, take the doctrine of al-Ash'ari when it was upon the madhab of who? Ibn Kullab. So the Ash'aris of today are in reality Kullabiyya. That's the haqq. That's what they're upon. So in reality they are Kullabiyya. In fact they are worse than Ibn Kullab, since they adopted much of what Ibn Kullab refuted from the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. In fact the Ash'aris of today, they're not Ash'ari. They are very much resemblant of Ibn Kullab, but actually in many areas they've gone even worse than Ibn Kullab, and they adopted the original ideas of the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah. That is why the book of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah, before he died, because he entered into the third stage. In his third stage he's writing now. Who's he refuting? He's refuting them. What he was upon before, he's refuting them. Obviously he has remnants. You don't leave 40 years and then go to Ibn Kullab and then come to the Hadith. Something of that was still stuck with him. But in his thinking and in his promotion of the Aqeedah, he came straight. Even though he still fell into error, because that was remnants. You know, things stick. If you've grown up upon something, it's hard to let it all go, because some of that new knowledge hasn't come to you. So they reject, they don't even, when you tell them this hadith, why don't you follow the book of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari after his repentance? Why don't you read those books? So Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari wrote a book entitled Al-Ibana and Asul al-Diyana. This was Abul Hasan's, not only his repentance, but his refutation upon that which he was upon before. On page 20 of this book, this is what Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari said, showing that this is a man who has made tawbah. He's realized the errors. So what did he say? Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah said in Al-Ibana and Usul al-Diyana, page 20, he said, our saying with which we speak and our belief upon which we practice our religion is to hold fast to the book of our Lord and to the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that which is narrated from the trustworthy ones, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, and the Imams of Hadith. What do you see the effect of the Hanbali scholars upon it? He said, this is what we're upon. Then he makes clear, he continues, and through that we are protected, he said. There's no kalam now. He doesn't want to know about kalam and ahlul kalam and theological rhetoric or the kullabiyya or the... He doesn't want to know any of that. He said, this is what we're upon. He said, and through that, we are protected. Then he said, and we hold fast to whatever was stated by Abu Abdullah, Imam Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal. Anything clearer than that? Then he said, may Allah make his face radiant. May Allah raise his rank and reward him abundantly. And those who oppose his speech, meaning Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal's speech, then they are to be opposed. Now he wants to fight them. Because he knows what they've done to him. All of these years, they misguided him. Now he wants to deal with them. They are to be opposed. That is because Imam Ahmad was a virtuous Imam. He was a complete leader through whom Allah made the truth clear, and by whom he repelled misguidance, and he clarified the manhaj and the methodology of the truth. He clarified the truth, and he bridled, and he extinguished the innovations of the innovators, the deviations of the deviants, and the doubts of the doubters. So may Allah have mercy upon this foremost Imam, a noble and great scholar of deep understanding. Anything clearer? He's left all of that and gone full circle. Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Sahaba, Tabi'een, Atba'u Tabi'een, Ahl Hadith, and specifically, I stand with Imam Ahmad. Clear. What do the Ash'aris today say? We'll follow his second stage. They reject that he ever changed. Except from I'tizal, they say he changed from the Mu'tazila to the Haqq. What's the Haqq to them? Ibn Kullab. But in reality, look what he himself is saying. So this retraction of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari clearly shows that he left the Kullabiyya and he adopted the Aqidah and methodology of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and his students. Especially since it is well known that Imam Ahmad, what kind of harsh stance that he held against Abdullah ibn Kullab and those who followed him. He knows what Imam Ahmad believes about Ibn Kullab. He's saying, you oppose Imam Ahmad, I'm not with you. And they are to be opposed if they oppose Imam Ahmad. This is what Abu al-Hasan came to. Because he knew what Imam Ahmad had said about Ibn Kullab and about the students of Ibn Kullab like Al-Muhasibi and others. And it was for this reason that he ordered the abandonment in Imam Ahmad of Al-Harith Al-Muhasibi, who was a follower of Ibn Kullab. So it is safe to assume that Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari had drawn close to the understanding and the creed of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This is further proven by his visit to Al-Barbahari, who is the figurehead in the time of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari died 324. Barbahari was in the same era, died 329, only 5 years after him. So in the same era. So he's realized, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah, I'm not upon that bid'ah. I've written what I've written. Now he wants the scholars of hadith. Anyone in doubt about the aqidah of Barbahari? You've all read it, right? If you haven't, grab it and read it. Right? Regardless of what Ahlul Bidah say, because they're scared of this book. That's why they always criticize it. Barbahari died in 329. From the companions of the students of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and he is known as the Imam of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah of his era. Imam Abu Muhammad al-Barbahari, rahimahullah ta'ala. So what does Abu al-Hasan do? He's seeking out who? He seeks out the Imam of Ahlus-Sunnah al-Barbahari. As Imam al-Dhahabi mentioned under the biography of al-Barbahari in his Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. So it is safe to assume that Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari had drawn close to the understanding and creed of Imam Ahmad. This is further proven by his visit to Imam al-Barbahari, the Imam of Ahlus-Sunnah at his time, where al-Ash'ari came in front of him, Abu al-Hasan, and he freed himself from the people of bid'ah. Freed himself. He said, I've come to you. He said, what do you want? He said, I've refuted them. And he started, he said, I wrote 15 books against them. This is what Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari is telling Barbahari. Barbahari was still not fully convinced. Why? Because these are the vanguards of the Sunnah. They don't easily convince. So what did he do? He turned his back on him. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. As we're upon what Ahmad ibn Hanbal was upon. Right? So what did Abu al-Hasan do? He's already written that I'm with Imam Ahmad. He went to see Barbahari. Imam al-Dhahabi mentions it. So this was that show us about Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. That Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah ta'ala, that he was deceived by the Mu'tazila for 40 years, up until 300 after the Hijrah. Then he came to Kullabiyya because he saw that to be the truth. Then he realized, actually, what's the big difference between the Mu'tazila and these people? They're all upon the Aqeedah of Jahm. All they're doing is distorting and metamorphosizing into other types of bid'ah. So you know what? Quran, he met the scholars of the Hanabila, Ahlul Hadith, and then he came to the Haqq. And as we've mentioned, having said that, it is not correct to conclude that Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari did not completely relinquish all of the influences of the Kullabiyya. It is possible that something remained with him of those influences. Because look at the challenges that he went through in his life. But there is no doubt he came closer to the madhab of Ahlus-Sunnah, as is clear in his final works, such as Al-Ibana and Usul al-Diyana. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. How long does it go? There was 30 pages that I compiled. We got to page 10. But I'm going to finish there, inshallah. Give me the mic. Okay. Now I'm finished, inshallah. It's been 1 hour 20 and khalas, inshallah. I don't want to go any further, but there are 20 more pages. I won't promise that I'm going to come back to Manchester anytime soon, but I'll try, inshallah, and maybe do the next 10 pages next time, and the final 10 pages a third time. Inshallah, we'll see, inshallah. But I hope that this is giving you something. As I say, you have to take each lecture alongside the rest of the lectures, because I'm not going into the details of the usul of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah and understanding the names and attributes of Allah, because I would not have had the time to explain what I've explained. Clear? Barakallahu feekum. So we'll conclude upon that. Wa subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Barakallahu.